Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. And what I want to do in this video is play with some anti-patterns. Now, what is an anti-pattern? An anti-pattern is just something that like you can do it, but most other developers wouldn't think that's like the best way to do things. It isn't the recommended practice or best practice. Um, Albeit something you can do, and sometimes in unique situations, an anti-pattern actually might be the right choice. But it's typically not the right choice. That's why it's called an anti-pattern. It's most of the time that's not the way you should deal with things. So for example, what I'm going to be doing today is in React, generally using things like events is kind of discouraged. Okay, you generally kind of work within the React flow where basically either everything's kind of through the hook. So basically everything's in a response to a state change, or everything's really in response to a state change. So having like things done outside of that sort of React render flow can have unpredictable results, or can result in you just having to do more work. You're essentially not leaning on the framework. You're kind of pushing against it in a sense. But I'm curious to see what can you do. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start a React project. So let's see here. Let's do npm init vitae, and then we do this whole thing. React events. I want a React project. React. Okay, I cd into the folder. React. I do an npm install. Okay, that installs all the libraries. I want to move this over to the side and move this over here, because what I'm going to want to do is do npm run dev. Okay, and then we're going to head over to localhost 3000. Cool. Okay, so this is like the default Vitae version of the default React page. So I'm just gonna bang out this. Okay, and I'm gonna try like events in different like capacity. Like there's like, again, there's browser events, there's nodes default event emitter, and then I'll bring in also my mercedevents library and see how that could work too. Okay, so let's think of of what we'd like to do. Let's build a simple counter from events. Okay, so what's gonna happen is we'll have some state const count set count equals use state. Okay, equals use state, and then we'll start with 0. And we're going to have an h1 that displays the count. Now where we're going to make things interesting is we'll have another component. And I'm not going to bother making a components folder. We'll just call it add1.js. And this is going to essentially be the button that adds one. And I'll just to fit the Vitae template, I'll rename that to add1.jsx. So import React from React, and const add1 equals props. So actually, I'm not going to even use props. Okay, and all this is going to return a button. Okay, add 1. So my desired goal is to set it up that we can add a button. When you click that button, it'll emit an event that the upper component app will hear. Okay, so that's essentially going to be the goal. So let's try it out. How would I want to do this? I'm assuming I would probably want to create the event in a separate file. Okay, so we'll just say this is events.js where we'll create our custom events. Okay, and we'll just say module.exports equal new event, and the event will be called test. Okay, that's going to be the event. Okay. Cool. Now what's going to happen then, we will import the event, import test from /events, and let's create an event for when this button gets clicked. So on click equals okay, and technically this button should receive the event object. Okay, so I should be able to do something like event.target, which is the DOM element, and then I should be able to do like dispatch event, and then we'll dispatch the test event. Okay, so that is done, and then that should bubble up. Okay, so technically if I go back to app here and I import the button, or import add1 from /add1, and I would put add1 right here. Okay, I don't see a button, so that tells me something's up. So console.log, failed reload, this could not syntax error, existent modules. Oh, I never exported the component. That would do it. Add1. Okay, let's refresh. Does not provide an export named default. Ah. See, I didn't know export default. We're in module world. There we go. Okay, so we got that. So now what I want to do, so again, I exported a new event from in this file. I receive that button, I receive that here and have the button emit that event when it loads. Okay, so that's cool. So what I would want to do then is make this div listen for that event. Okay. Now, my question is how we're going to add the listener. Let's first try to do it the traditional way where we write on test, but I think all of these are built in, so you can't use necessarily custom events with this, which is part of the reason why they want to discourage events. So if I were to do like on test and then just say something like, just put just an arbitrary thing here, console.log hello. If I were to do that, so on test, because again the event is called test, if I were to do that, let's see here, warning unknown event, it will be ignored at div. Yeah, so see, that's not going to work. So we'd have to traditionally make this happen. So let's try using the use ref hook. So you already can see, like, using events in React is probably a little trickier than one would ideally want. So let's create a ref, const div, okay, equals, it's going to be use ref, which will initiate as null, and then we will do ref here, and we'll put the div as the ref. Okay, and the thing is I need to access that ref, so let's just console log the ref real quick. So make sure see, do I already have access to the div? Good, I do have the div there. Good. Okay, so let's see if I just do this. Div dot add, oh, it's actually div dot current dot add event listener. Problem is I want to add an event listener every single time, and they don't get removed when the component dismounts. So in this case, we are going to want to use use effect. So again, as you can see, like, this is going to be a lot more work than if I just leaned on the framework instead of pushing against the framework. And I'm sure you can create an abstraction to simplify all this if you really wanted to force events in React, but let's see here. So what I can do is I could do a use effect. So that way the first time this component loads, okay, and then again it's going to update anytime the count changes because the component's going to update, so we need to re-add the listener. What we want to do is we're going to take div.current.add event listener. We're going to listen for listener, okay, and we're going to listen for the test event, and we're going to just basically set count. Oh no, I don't want to create an infinite loop in that case. Let's think about that. Because then if I change the count, it'll trigger that function again, which will add one to the count. Oh, but it's adding the listener. It's not doing it right away. So okay, I got it. Which should be count plus 1. Okay. So that adds the listener. Now again, we want to clean up that listener. So when the component gets re-rendered, we don't want that, or dismounted, we don't want that listener still there. So we're going to say, hey, when we're going to return another function, because that'll be run when the component gets removed, to remove that listener. Okay, so let's see here. Remove event listener. I always forget the function for that. Okay, remove event listener. That would do it, wouldn't it? See any syntax? Let's take a look at some sample code. Just make sure. False. Is that the third argument? Okay. Is there also remove event listeners by chance? It's just gonna remove all of them. Nope. Removes the event target and event listener previously registered. That listeners can be removed by passing in a abort signal to an event listener, and then calling abort on the controller owning the signal. String by which the event listener function of which the handler value. Got it. Okay, so this means it wants me to kind of actually have this. Wants me to kind of package this separately. So let's do this. Control X. Const add 1 equals, and that equals that function. So that way this is add 1. And then I can do div dot current dot remove event listener, and just say, hey, I want to remove an event that's test that uses this function, and then that should remove it. Okay. Let's think here. The thing is that that's just going to run when I need this to run every time. So I really don't need to make this the return, because the returned function only runs when the component's dismounted. Just because the state updates doesn't mean the component is dismounted. So what I really want to do is do this. Remove the listener before I add a listener. So that way I'm always removing the previous one, theoretically. Okay. Let's refresh the page, see what errors I'm getting. Okay, am I getting any errors currently? Okay, so let's see if it works. Okay, so because technically if I click on an event listener should be added to this. Let's see, it's not working. Telling me that the event listener is not being added. Okay, let's test that out. Let me click on this. Hit console.log. Hello. Okay. Now if I click on that, that function doesn't run. Let me console log div again. Oops. Console.log div, see what the div is. Okay, it should be current. Let's see, there's all the stuff. Yeah, so that should work, theoretically. Let's see here. Is the use effect running? That's the next question. Okay, so it defines a function. Let's console log goodbye. It's goodbye. That means the use effect is running. So let's refresh the page. So I do see goodbye. Then I see on this first render, we have null for the div. That's fine. But it seems to never update, so let's try that again. Okay. Let's see here. I click the button, it dispatches the event. Let's just make sure that this is functions registering the function. Yeah, so that's running. It's not throwing an error, so it must be dispatching the event. The problem is that the event listener isn't added on that very first render, because so in that case trying to crack this code. Okay, so that's not necessarily gonna work. We remove the listener before we add the listener. Let me just try adding the listener and moving on. And again, this is a test event. Yep. So if I refresh that. Okay. So let's try just plain JavaScript. So I'm going to get rid of his use reference and just say complaining about that. Okay. And what I'm going to do is say const div equals document dot query selector div dot app, because it's a class name of app. And let's just do div dot add event listener. We'll just do it the old school way. Test. Just make sure it's test. Test. Okay, and then again, it's just going to run this add one function whenever that event gets emitted. Okay, let's just see let's see if that works. Okay, I mean that technically that event listener should be on there. Actually, I should be able to see it in Elements. So if I go to this div with app and take a look at event listeners, do I see a test event listener? See, I see. Yep, I see a test, and there is an event listener. So let's try it out. So if I click on add one, okay, the event is emitted, or at least maybe it's not being emitted. Thinking through the logic. Okay, so why wouldn't it here? Now, is there some sort of way I can see what events were emitted? Console chap. Because theoretically, the button should emit the event, which should then bubble to here. So, I'm going to abandon this approach. Let's try it with node events. Okay, so in node, I would import. So I go back here and I would just import event emitter from events. And then it would be new event emitter. And then that's it. Okay. Then again, we would pass this down here. So we would import the event emitter. Okay, which we'll still call a test, why not? Except in doing this whole event.target.dispatch event thing here, I would just do test dot dispatch or test dot emit, and then we would just emit an event called test. Okay, and then that would be it on that end. So then technically what should happen is I would still import test from /events here. Okay, and then from here, what should happen is in this use effect, I would just use the emitter and I would just say test dot on. Whenever the test event gets emitted, do this whole add one function. Okay, and then technically I don't need to do that. And I don't need this console log because technically this object exists outside of these components. So once the function is registered, this event gets emitted, it should just work. Okay, so let's see here. Does that work? Oh, doesn't like that either, but let's take a look at errors. Okay, on context, requested module ID VTA browser external events does not provide an export named event emitter. Okay, so let's do this. How about I just import events, and then we say events dot event emitter. Does that fix the problem? Module events has been externalized for browser compatibility and cannot be accessed in client code. Okay. So let's. Yep, it doesn't like it because it's a node thing. And again, node things don't work in the browser. So it doesn't like that. So that approach is out of the window. So let's try my custom event thing. npm install, which doesn't use node, or it's just a pure self-constructed events class. So npm install mercedevents. Okay. So let's do that, and we go over here. We would say import merced events from merced events. So this would just be a new merced events object. So this should address all the issues. Merced events. Let me do it. And again, so this would just import that from there, which is fine. Test.emit, that still works. And that should still work. So this should still all work the same. So npm run dev. This will be our last chance to see if this works. This one works, except it only works once. Okay, so the component, and the reason being interesting enough. Okay, so the reason why this only works once is because this function gets defined once at that initial run of the use effect, at which point count is 1, so it's saying, okay, set count to 1 plus 1. It doesn't necessarily update on each round. It's still referring to that original count. Cool. Okay, so then in that case, let's see what happens if I do this. Still technically not what I want to do, but, or not efficient. But, okay. So let's see here, if I click here. Yeah, so this works, but like notice like the amount of, like, where's the hello coming from? See, that hello is running a lot more than the amount of times I clicked it. Okay, because this use effect is running a few times. Like I'm clicking on the add one button, and I'm triggering it a multiple of times because I'm adding an additional listener each time. So it's still running all the other listeners for the previous numbers. It's just now running one for the next number. So that's not ideal either. Okay, so see, that's just going to keep compounding. Okay, that's not good. Okay, this works. Okay, so we can see that we could use events, but ideally I'd want to remove that event listener on each go around. So every time I'd want to like empty out that array. So I'd probably want to do something like test dot events dot test right now would equal, and I just, because I know what's going on in the underlying library, what I should do is add a function to be able to clear out to clear a particular event of all of its listeners. That would be sort of the thing to do. But if I do this, this should work better. So let's see what happens if I click hello. Let's see, okay, that fixes it, because see, it's adding in one, but I'm emptying out that array every time, so this works. So like technically we could use my library to work with events in React. It doesn't run into the issues that I was running into with the front-end browser event emitter, and it doesn't have the issues with the Node API because it relies on sort of, you know, not browser-facing Node APIs. It just works on this. My class works purely on just pure JavaScript implementation that's agnostic to browser or backend or front end, and it works. This definitely made clear some optimizations I can make to the library, so I'm going to go do those right now. But yeah, so we can see like why you shouldn't use events in React now. I think we've made that clear that it's not doesn't lend well to that, and if anything, it makes life harder to use your traditional events. Now again, I don't mean necessarily like using event listeners, like doing an on change, but using like custom events in React, whether it's like the browser custom events API or the Node custom events API, those don't seem to work at all. We're using a custom events library like mine, which does work, but it's more work than it was worth, at least in React, because React again has its own sort of set flow of how things happen. So you're better off just using use effect and set state and all the hooks, which I had to use anyways. So essentially, like all I really saved myself was passing down this add one, instead of passing this add one function down as props. They just communicated through the event, which frameworks like Vue, Svelte, and Angular are much more amenable to. Like, they have that kind of feature set built in for you to be able to emit events and use custom events, because they're not trying to enforce a sort of one-way direction when it comes to stuff. So I'm not sure how many of you are going to have found this interesting, but hopefully you watched it, you found this interesting, you learned a few things. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcode.com. Have a great day and enjoy.